Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber. Welcome to the Wagon Wheel. I am Jarrod Kimber, and this is the Cricket Podcast where we answer questions from you, the audience, or from whoever the audience. Remember, if you are watching live on YouTube, you can send normal comments in or super chats if you are desperate for me to respond to what you were saying. And also, you can ask questions beforehand on Patreon by going to patreon.com/Jarrod Kimber, where a bunch of people have already done that, like Ali, who says, what is stopping the bigger associate nations to pull all their broadcasts together and sell it as a package, since they can't fetch cash individually? That way there can be an international league between two much smaller nations, independent of the test nations. So I'm aware of one time, and you might see one like Bertus de Jong or Andrew Nixon might be a better example of this, but I'm aware of one time where they tried to make this happen, which was something called the North Sea Oil Competition or something. I've got a feeling maybe it wasn't oil, but North Sea Competition. Why would it be North Sea Oil? Maybe it was. I can't remember. But they were going to have a competition between Scotland, Ireland, and the Dutch, which I assume was going to be regular first-class games, all broadcast to each other, and limited overs. But I can't remember the full details of it. But I think what they're all thinking is, we don't have enough players for a good first-class system here. You don't, and they don't. So if we all pull together, we can all play each other and do it that way and have a couple of sides each. I think it was going to be 2 sides each. And then the money would have been shared as well. Not quite what you're talking about, but very similar. I would say that the major problem, Ali, is unless you have a system where all the teams are near each other, or you have enough interest from broadcasters. So Ireland and Scotland would be interesting, but my memory of Ireland is that they have a very complicated TV rights structure to do with Sky, which I don't fully understand, if we're being honest. And I have asked many times before, and I've never quite got to the bottom of it. I would assume Scotland has a similar one, which means that those two countries, I'm not sure, could join the league that you're talking about. So then who are we talking about? The Dutch, Bermuda, Namibia, Nepal, Oman, Papua New Guinea, these sorts of countries. I'm missing some, aren't I? I'm missing some other obvious ones. But Uganda, I suppose now, Kenya, those sorts of countries. I just don't think there is enough of a movement towards that to be able to do that and make money off it. Now, is there a streaming platform way of doing this and going to, I don't know, some sort of, maybe going to fan code in India would be an interesting one. Going to fan code. Okay, here we go. This is what we're going to do. We've got all these games. You'll have more games available to you. We're not looking for millions and millions of dollars. We're looking for enough to fund it and make sure all of our players and everything is paid for correctly. Perhaps, maybe, Amazon Prime, that sort of Netflix, that sort of stuff is also a potential option. But I don't think overall there is a really, really strong market for those teams. Now, does Japan, does China, does the USA, does Canada swing those? Because, I didn't mention those countries. Mostly because I forgot them. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting one. I'm not sure that the money is there at the moment. I know that there has been a lot of people have tried to sell things to Amazon in cricket of recent times, myself included, when it comes to cricket. And they're kind of interested enough to take the meeting, but I felt like they're still a step away from really going all in at the moment. But they're interested. Would they get enough out of that? I don't know. You get a lot of games, and you only need a couple of really interesting games, and then things change quite dramatically. Ratings wise and money wise. James says, who would you pick in a contemporary rest of the world team to play in a test against peak West Indies? Let's say roughly 78 to 84. Sabina Park. Okay, Sabina Park. How would you rate their chances of winning? Include South Africans if you like. So who would you have opening the batting then? So you face. I'm trying to think of who the best. Uh, would you have Boycott? Or does he help you win against the West Indies though? I'm not sure what his record is against the West Indies. So you then have to start to go through and really have a look at what openers they were. It's a really fascinating question, James. I don't know if I can come up with a great answer, but you'd be looking for players like Ponting would be one. Probably Alan Border would be another. I suppose you could say Sanal Gavaskar. I know his record against West Indies is more complicated than is remembered. But he might, Sabina Park's probably not the place he wants to go back to, though. Saying that out loud. I'm trying to think of someone else. That sort of situation, would you be worth having someone like a Langer? Steve, I was thinking someone like Graham Smith, but his hands are too low, right? Alistair Cook? Maybe Alistair Cook is actually the right answer there. Facing the extra fast bowlers. And then who would you have at the other end? You might have someone like Hayden to go back at them, perhaps. I would say Warner, but again, I don't think Warner made many runs in the West Indies. And then you would have Ponting, probably Border. Who else would you want around 5 and 6? I'm trying to think of good players of pace specifically. Who would be fantastic in that kind of situation. Yeah, but that's how you would do it. So you would have those. You would have probably, you might go Keith Miller as your all-rounder, because that gives you another proper fast bowler. And you could have Keith Miller at 6 and Imran Khan at 8, right, in that kind of a team. I think you'd probably pick Warne, because you'd want a wrist spinner. And you've already got the extra fast bowler anyway. You'd probably pick McGrath. So who have we got? We've got Imran, we've got Keith Miller, we've got McGrath. Then you would pick either someone like Wasim Akram. There's not as many left-arm pace bowlers in the West Indies. You could also go with Dennis Lilly, Richard Hadley would be really, really good options as well. Pat Cummins, Jasprit Bumrah, Rabada, Stain. There's a few. I think there's a few different. Depending on how you want to mix and match, tall, short, swing, left arm, all those sorts of things. So I think there's a few different options there. You could also use Barry Richards as your opener. So you could have Barry Richards opening with someone like Cook or Gavaskar, Boycott, if you wanted, or Hayden. You could go all out, right, and just go, good luck, everyone, and let's go from there. And you could also play Graham Pollock at 4 and move Border down to 5 if you wanted to. And then the wicket keeper, probably you want someone like Gilchrist or Les Ames or Andy Flower. Alex Stewart maybe as well. Someone who doesn't mind the ball coming through to them. Would Virat Kohli be another option perhaps as well? Fast pitch. We know he rises to fast pitches. I think there's a few different options. It probably depends on how much you want to be specific about it from that point of view. Oh, I just saw that you said contemporary, rest of the world. Now, who would you pick in a contemporary? Oh, from 78 to 84. Oh, now I think I completely answered that question wrong. But I think I came up with answers that make sense at least. Will says, what would be your lineup for an all-rounder 11 based on your crick pick selections? You can't substitute a keeper for one of them of the 15 selected. Your 15 are Callis, Hadley, Dev, Shakib, Cairns, Imran Khan, Jadeja, Stokes, Flintoff, Pollock, Sobers, Miller, Botham, Faulkner, Gregg. I would make either Faulkner or Stokes my wicket keepers. I just think both of them would work out a way of how to do it. I don't know why. I suppose Sobers actually might be another. It might be Sobers. It might be one of those three would be my wicket keeper. So if you're doing opening the batting, I'm just having a look. So you probably open the batting with Callis and Faulkner. Yeah, you would probably open the batting with Callis and Faulkner. At 3, you would have Sobers. At 4, you would have Miller. 5, you would have Gregg, maybe? Or Stokes? Gregg or Stokes, yeah. 6, you would have Shakib at 6. Then you would have, would you need him and Jadeja at 6? Well, I think he's probably a slightly stronger batter. And then with the bowlers, yeah, you just pick the best of the bowlers that are left, right? So it would probably be Pollock, Hadley. I'm missing someone. Maybe you would go just use Jadeja twice. We're not worried about matchups here. And I'm missing one other bowler. I've already got Hadley, don't I? Imran Khan. I don't think I had him in there. So he would be another specialist bowler in that side. You could also use Imran Khan as an opening bat, I think, if you wanted to. Not that, in this bizarre team that Will has made me construct. Ram Kumar says, with 2 big guns in Bumrah and Kuldeep, does India have the strongest bowling attack for the T20 World Cup? No, they won't have the strongest bowling attack because they'll have Bumrah and Kuldeep, but who will be the other bowlers? Probably a seamer they don't quite trust. And then my guess is they will probably start the tournament with 3 all-rounders to make up the other 8 overs so that they can bat to 8 and, have some backup with Kuldeep at 9 perhaps, is my guess. I mean, who knows what they're going to do. And so then you've got Dubé to bowl maybe 1 occasional over. You've got Hardik who can bowl hopefully 3 or 4, and Akshar and Jadeja to bowl 3 or 4. And then you've got your 8 overs out of that, which is fine. There's some good defensive options there. I mean, if you look at that compared to Sri Lanka's bowling attack, which is going to have Patharana, Tikshana, Hasaranga. I don't know how they're going to put the rest of their attack together as well, but they have the option of Tushara or have I already said Madhushanka? I don't think I did say Madhushanka. So Madhushanka, and there's one other bowler I'm thinking of that's quite good as well. So I would say that from that point of view, Ram, and we're talking about the 11s, I think they have and what the final 11 will be. I think Sri Lanka probably have the best bowling attack. Am I missing anyone else? Australia's is a bit weird. England's is not particularly good. New Zealand have an interesting one. I don't think it's better than India's. So yeah, there's maybe Sri Lanka. Oh, and what will South Africa be? South Africa could have a really interesting one as well. And they usually, the difference is, I think Sri Lanka and South Africa will pick more specialist bowlers. And so even though you have Bumrah and Kuldeep, you've still got 3 other guys. And I think that South Africa might have slightly better specialist bowlers because they'll pick more of them based on how they have been playing. I get another one from Ram Kumar. Have you analysed Hardik Pandya's true average and true strike rate with the bat and ball over the last 4 years? The smell test looks dodgy for him being picked for India and definitely not a number 1 pick. Have I analysed? I don't know how much I've gone through everything for him on that. When I say definitely not number 1 pick, I think you and a couple other people have misunderstood this. Hardik Pandya, at his best, is a number 1 pick because there is simply no other bowling, batting combination when it comes to seam that any side has anywhere near this, right? So when you have spin, you have matchups that's an issue. So if you have a very good all-rounder like Shakib or Jadeja or Akshar, or so even lower down like Tom Hartley or Ashton Turner and those sorts of players, Ashton Turner, Ashton Aker, Ashton someone, Mitch Santner, those sorts of players, there are times when you might not feel comfortable about bowling them, right? Seam bowling is a very, very different thing. He can move it around. His best ball is really, really good. He's got a bouncer. He has a little bit of extra pace. He can do a few different things. He is, like Andre Russell, probably going to go for runs and probably going to get you wickets. But he's also a genuine, I would say, 5, 6, and maybe he's a number of 4 now, but that's a whole different conversation. I don't think he should be, but... And he can bat through the innings and he has power at the end, right? What you were talking about is his form. And that's why, and I think people didn't listen to this when I said it, he should be the number 1 option, but the way he's playing, he's not, right? That doesn't mean he still shouldn't be in the team and that they shouldn't have a go at using him. But he's not playing the way he should be. I don't think he's in great form right at the moment. I think he got stuck in the anchor brain. And I don't think his body's quite 100% on his bowling. I looked at his numbers a couple of years ago when we did a piece on him. So it might have been coming into last season. I can't remember now. And they really stood up and they were magnificent. But what you are doing is the same thing that everyone does with all-rounders, right? It's the same thing that people do with Ben Stokes. It's the same thing that people do with everyone who is not like Imran Khan or Ian Botham or Keith Miller or Garfield Sobers. It's like, yeah, once you are all around, you are going to be slightly limited in certain ways. The chances of him ever being economical and taking wickets over a long period of time, pretty low, right? The chances of him ever being a completely fully developed batter, pretty low. He's an all-rounder. He is supposed to have flaws. And I've had this conversation about Jadeja so many times. And people don't understand that. Imran Khan averaged 50 for a decade in Test cricket. He did it by blocking and getting not outs, batting at number 6. Brilliant, right? No one thought he should have batted number 3 because he was averaging 50 for that decade, though, right? No one thought, this is our answer. He's going to make 100 after 100. He just made a lot of scores between 40 and 72, right? Or 75, whatever it was with Imran. These players are flawed, right? And he is flawed. But there is no all-rounder in the world in T20 cricket that would automatically play in the top 4 batters and the top 4 bowlers, right? Shakib, when he was at his peak, was certainly probably up there. When was the last time we had anyone like that? Maybe Callis, if he wanted to bowl more, perhaps. Maybe Pete Callis, you could say, would have been a good 4th bowler. It's hard to tell with Callis because it was Klusner and was there as well. So it was, and sometimes McMillan, and they had so many all-round options. So it's hard to even tell if he was a 4th bowler at times. But maybe Callis was another one. There aren't many, right? They are flawed cricketers. And at the moment, Hardik Pandya is not playing good cricket, which is why he is not definitely a number 1 pick, right? He should definitely be a number 1 pick with his skills, but he's not definitely a number 1 pick because he's playing an anchor role, which the India team don't need. He's not bowling particularly well, and he doesn't look like he's in form. Sometimes I think people hear part of a line and they get so upset that they don't listen to the full context. Let's have a quick break here, and we will come back in a moment on a Wagon Wheel for more cricket chat and all the other things that we do here. This is brought to you by Cricket 8. They are a new player in the game trying to educate fans on what is really happening in cricket. We have a partnership with them where we host live watch-alongs, do podcasts, and write articles. If you want to know what is really happening with our game, visit cricket8.com. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now. Jarrod Kimber says, did Anderson cross England the last 3 years by only being able to bowl a limited number of overs per test compared to other English bowlers? If you go back, they always bowled him less away from home. My memory of it, it was a high amount of overs that he bowled at home and a lower amount of overs that he bowled away, which would be similar to most people who are more home dependent. So Ashwin, for instance, he doesn't even always get picked when he goes away, right? And then you have the opposite of that, which is, Kapil Dev or Nathan Lyon, who, if they go to the friendly conditions, probably have to go back up. If he was really costing them, they could have just not picked him, right? Like, he hasn't done it. This is weirdly phrased, so I'm not quite sure what you mean here, Kumar, because he didn't cost them anything. He's a cricketer who's available for selection, and they picked him. Who was the better bowler that they had available to them that would have bowled more overs better than the fewer overs that he bowled? I think one reason that they are moving on from him is because they can't be relied on as much overseas, and they don't have an all-rounder anymore that can bowl overs, that can be relied on. When they had a 5-person attack, it actually made sense for Anderson to bowl fewer overs, although I've checked, he actually bowled a ton of overs even when they had 5 bowling options. So that didn't always fill up. And if you look, sometimes they would bowl him into the ground, probably thinking, well, he's not a fast bowler. But he would bowl really, really long spells. I think I'm right in saying that only Wagner bowled more 10-over spells than Anderson during Wagner's career. I could be wrong with that, but they bowled him into the ground a lot of times. So last 3 years, they were trying to get the most out of him, but also They didn't think they had a better replacement. So whether you say, there's two ways of putting it. Oh, he cost them, or they thought that that was still a better option than using someone else. Naveen says, this might be a stupid question on my part, but one of the often cited improvements for bringing balance between bat and ball in 2020s is that the ball could swing for more overs and hold its shape for longer. Is the ICC, cricket boards, or ball companies looking to improve, innovate the white cricket ball? Maybe a reinforced seam, different materials. So the ball was reinforced in 2020 by Kookaburra. I want to say secretly, but it's not fair to say secretly, but largely quietly. They were having problems with their balls. They were going soft, and it was the red ball they were trying to fix, and they reinforced it with like a plastic cover for the cover's the wrong way, but for the cork parts, a thicker plastic, well, maybe not thick is the right word, but a more sturdy cover under the ball to keep the ball in shape for longer, keep it harder. And for a couple of years, Naveen, averages and strike rates in one-day cricket and T20 cricket dropped, largely at the top of the game. So it happened already. That is the case. Look, the white ball, there's only so many things we can do to improve it. It's basically a piece of trash, and it shouldn't be used. I would argue that the pink ball is already better and should be used in limited overs cricket. It stays harder for longer. So we should get more help for bowlers and more boundaries from the pink ball than we get from the white ball, because pink ball can be dyed and the white ball has to be painted, and that's why the white ball doesn't work. So I would probably already use the pink ball. Might be a bit of a problem for some of the teams who have adopted pink as their colored clothing, but it is a better option. The problem with this, and I've done so much on the balls, there might be a big long video that we've actually made, Naveen, about cricket balls on the main site, if you go over and have a look. But what I would say is, no one's in charge of cricket balls. Kookaburra is a small company that does cricket and hockey equipment. SG and Dukes are, again, not particularly multinational companies. Dukes is really tiny, right? The ICC doesn't want to buy Kookaburra, and I'm not sure the Kookaburra wants to be bought from them. But if this sport was run correctly, that's what would happen. That's what baseball did with their balls. They essentially went, okay, we're going to buy it, and we're going to tailor exactly what we need when we need it. Kookaburra make a lot of money from international balls, but they also, do a lot of other stuff. It isn't their main business. I could be wrong, but I'd be shocked if it was their main business. And so there are hundreds of things you could do to fix cricket balls. I think buy all three ball companies, bring all their knowledge and talent together, and work out how you can actually fix all the balls. If we're being honest, but. Prashant says, you've spoken about how talent management would be a challenge for India as it was for Australia in the 2000s. If you were to go about it, how would you do it? Contracts to 50 players, completely different teams for different formats, letting them know where in the depth chart each player lies. Yeah, I think it was Fraser McGurk, and I don't know what podcast he was on. Is it called Willow Talk? Is the one? I thought it was Brad Haddon's podcast, but it seems to be his co-host podcast because he gets other people on. And I've forgotten the co-host name, but it keeps popping up on my TikTok. And Fraser McGurk, I'm pretty sure was on that podcast, unless he was on one of the others, and I've forgotten it. And Fraser McGurk was like, straight away was told, he was saying, yeah, it was really well communicated to me and everything else. That's where you start, is communication. Understanding what players need, what they need to hear, and everything else. If you're telling them they're not in the side, they're always going to be not happy, right? But you have to have a professional environment around that. The next thing, is showing them where they are on depth charts and explaining to them why they are in certain positions. It's not going to stop them being angry or anything else. The next one is making sure that they are still developing. I think the worst thing with having too much talent is that some players just don't develop anymore because they're not in the main team. And you're like, well, we don't need them. We've got the best number 4 and number 5 in the world. We don't need this backup number 5. And so if he keeps developing, we might pick him again one day. But it's like, well, what if the other two guys both do their knee tomorrow and you need that available to you? What if the replacement that you have who is younger doesn't make it? You need to make sure that the talent is currently being worked. So every player in professional cricket, and this isn't an Indian thing, but every player in professional cricket should be in constant conversations with directors of cricket, general managers, coaches, selectors, whatever those people are, to be like, okay, what are you working on now? What do you need? Where do you want to go? We don't think you're ready yet, but you obviously think you do. Is there something we would like you to be able to bowl this ball, or we would like you to be able to work on this part of your shot making? We want you to be more rounded against spin. We want you to be able to reverse sweep against spin. We want you to hook better, or whatever that may be. Having those sorts of conversations, and so many cricketers don't really know where they sit. I think that's a really good part to it. Your different teams with different formats is another interesting one. I think it's getting harder and harder for these guys to look at that last One Day World Cup. There was a lot of players in that One Day World Cup who were, and the England team was the most honest before the World Cup. It wasn't like they failed and then started saying this. They were like, we feel like we have to relearn one-day cricket. It's hard, right? And it's also hard for the team. Do you not pick Josh Buttler and Jason Roy for those events because of that? And then you're probably going to pick someone else who hasn't played a lot of 50-over cricket. But the three formats is getting harder and harder. But I just think conversations and honesty and having development plans for every single player. Okay, you're here. You want to get here, and we want you here. How do we get either meet in the middle or tap both of those goals? Aditya says, in this year's IPL, Travis Head has 500 runs, a 50 average, and 200 strike rate. Is this the greatest batting performance in IPL season or any league season for that matter? I would have to go through everyone else's numbers. I think there's been some kind of weird outliery seasons before. That was, was it? And in lower, like, if you think about it from a lower scoring kind of situation. So I'm trying to have a look. There was someone, oh, that's match day. I can't find it. No, I may not be able to bring it up. I was trying to look at a random player's record. So the Big Bash and the CPL are low-scoring seasons. And there have been seasons where players have, low-scoring series, I should say. And there have been seasons where players have had huge years. I was thinking, I don't know if the Usman Khawaja one, because he didn't play that much. But there have been years when players have made just an absolute ton of runs, you know, with a huge average. And then also a ridiculous strike rate. But sometimes they're from smaller sample sizes. I think with Travis Head, you've got a high scoring series, so everyone is doing this, right? Like a lot of players are doing this. But you still have, if you looked at his raw numbers, I think I'd be surprised if anyone has ever scored that many runs in a series at that average with that strike rate, would be my guess. I think we would have had higher averages. We certainly had more runs, but not with all three together in that way. But how much better is he than everyone else in the league? Would be the interesting one, because everyone else in the league is doing something like this. That's when you start to get in the contextual side of those sorts of things. Oh. Matt says, why can't English-born players represent other nations that they qualify via ancestry, yet still count as homegrown players in their county sides? Oh, do you think that rule will ever change? It is to do with making yourself available for the England side. So you have to make yourself available for the England side to play as a English player. So obviously there are differences with retirement. So if you are retired, but you are then not making yourself available for any international sides. But I believe that is the ruling. I'm not a complete expert on this, Matt, but I do remember talking to people, and because there's all these weird gray areas, and sometimes players have got through them, and sometimes they haven't, and all sorts of things. But that one seems to have holds firm. So unless I'm misremembering it, and I haven't looked this up in a long time, Matt, but that was always my thought. Is so Ryan Harris signed a contract as a cold pack to play in England, and I think did he play for Surrey or Sussex? Might have played a game or two. So he signed a contract, he came over and played, and then he signed a contract with Queensland Cricket. And in the contract with Queensland Cricket, he said that he was available for Australian cricket, which meant he had to make a choice of which country he was going to say he was available to be selected for. And obviously he had the contracts overlapped. So maybe if you're being really technical, Matt, maybe you could take but they're all year contracts now. So I don't even think you do that. I was thinking maybe you could have you take a contract at the last minute, play for 6 months, then renounce your England. But I think you could only do that once anyway before the ECB would probably come in with a new regulation. So that is my understanding of it. But I'm not an expert. That's, people like George Dobell and Lizzie Ammon, they've spent years working out all that sort of stuff. I've looked in a couple of them just because they've been interesting. But that's how I understand it. Christopher says, do you think England have got it right with Jimmy? It's a really good question, Christopher. if the idea is we have to get this right for the Ashes, then I'm already skeptical. If they are, which I assume they are, basically saying to themselves, we are putting ourselves in a position where we cannot be reliant on a bowler who is not as consistent taking wickets away from home and is probably can't play as many games as we would like him to anyway, and we need to move on. I kind of get that. I think Jimmy was on his way to retirement anyway, and perhaps maybe they rushed it a little bit towards the front of the summer, then towards the end of the summer. There's no reporting in that. That's completely speculation based on just how I felt watching the situation. I've been very wrong with Jimmy Anderson before, so I could be wrong with that. And I think if that was the case, they probably said, look, can we find a compromise? We need to move on if you're going to leave at the end of the summer. We can't give you a bunch of test matches. We need to use this summer to prepare for a much tougher summer and the Ashes coming up ahead. And I think that is probably a fair way of looking at it from a cricket perspective. You know, but if you want to go the sentimental way, or even the cricket way of who is the bowler they are replacing him with. So me and Bumble just did an opening bowler who replaces Anderson, and Bumble came up with Gus Atkinson. I think Gus Atkinson's a fantastic bowler, but he's not going to replace Jimmy Anderson right now, right? Like, and I said Ollie Robinson, and Bumble quite rightly said, well, you know, what about the fitness and the second and third spells? He's right. There is no replacement for Anderson. And so I liked the idea of keeping him around as a kind of bowling coach, kind of occasional bowler with your squad and going forward. Because, am I wrong in thinking this? That is what a professional sporting team would do. Like, as in a non-international sporting team would do. They'd be like, well, why would we get rid of this asset? When, you know, Jimmy, we're going to pay you a lot less and you're going to play a lot less, but we will grandfather you into maybe a contract, a coaching contract or something else on top of that, where we will supplement some of your income. We only need you to play 6 test matches a year, but we need you to be fully ready for those test matches. And maybe they did offer all this and he didn't want it. But I just think you keep that around as long as possible. Satchmo says, do you think the 1984 West Indies, they're coming up a lot today, would beat Steve Waugh's Australians over 5 tests played on the Australian pitches as they are today, including the use of DRS? Well, that is fascinating. Good luck to the West Indies playing Shane Warne. I mean, it's so hard because neither of those sides really played DRS cricket. And so the techniques would have to change so dramatically in the way that they played. I know this isn't a perfect example because he's not in the side, but Jimmy Adams wouldn't be able to play Shane Warne the way that he played these days. And so there's probably other West Indians as well that might be in that. I think because of the leg spin option, 1984 West Indies, and I think Australia's batting was slightly better. I think you go with Australia. But what's the third Australian bowler? So it's Gillespie, McGrath, and Warne. If it's Lee, I'm trying to think of who goes up. Maybe you mix and match Lee and Fleming. Don't think you would use Rifle. Yeah, maybe that's what you do. You mix and match a little bit. I was going to say you don't bowl Fleming at Wacker, but you probably do want to bowl Fleming at the Wacker. Maybe you don't bowl Gillespie at the Wacker, which is also probably, he's probably got a ridiculous record at the Wacker. But yeah, I think that's what you do. I think you if you use Lee and that, I just think the batting is a little bit deeper of that peak Australian side than I think the West Indies was in '84. Not that the West Indies weren't fantastic. I don't think there's much in it. I don't even know if I can get my head around on the pitches being played today and the use of DRS, because that's almost too much. Too many variables for my brain. You guys have given me some options today. Jessica says, are there any cricket team terms or phrases that you find especially grating to the ear? For example, I hate the phrase, the line belongs to the umpire, because it's semantically meaningless. And I hate saying that the batter nicks off, because the syntax is a jumbled mess. Yeah, I do use nicked off. I know, or nicks off. I know people don't like that one. I always thought a heavy ball was said incorrectly, and I got in a huge fight with Ian O'Brien about this once. only because I think too often when we say heavy ball, we're just talking about a tall bowler or a strong bowler, whereas actually a heavy ball is probably something slightly different, which, to be fair, he that's the part that he agrees with. So I think just saying someone who is big and strong bowls a heavy ball is too easy. But I love the phrase heavy ball, so I'm more than happy to go with it. I suppose good areas is one that I kind of love and hate, which is probably why it's become the name of the show. He always knows when he's nicked it. He always knows when he knows, and he doesn't always know when he doesn't always know. I hate that one so much, Jessica. As a historian, how often would you come across a whisper of a fascinating old story from back in the 19th century or earlier, and you try and do a deep dive of it, only to come up with nothing juicy to report on, or due to a lack of primary documentation? The English stuff's pretty good. Some of the overseas stuff, not in England. England just had so many freaking newspapers, and cricket was, a big part of them. That there's no doubt that there's absolutely tons from England. I'm currently researching an old historical story, which I cannot wait to do a video on. It'll probably have to be after the World Cup, but it is absolutely bananas, and I'm so happy. I found out about it recently, and then I was talking to Giles when we did the podcast with him, and he brought up something as well. One of us brought up something, and it reminded me to go back into it. But yeah, there is some stuff. The women inventing overarm bowling story, when you actually trace that back, you realize it's like the woman's son, like a generation later, claiming that it happened. That was a bit disappointing because I assumed it was true because so many people talked about it. There's a lot of stuff that just isn't reported on. I tried to look at the history of the sweep shot, and I don't think it was ever documented, right? And a lot of the early shots I don't think were documented. So I would love to know how some of these shots came about, and it's really, really hard to find the source material on them. And I have a huge project that I am working on, which might end up being a book or a documentary or something, which a lot of the stuff I've tracked it down enough to make a big story out of it, but there's so much that we can't tell, and we have to be subjective on. So yeah, it's a little bit awkward sometimes, but that's the business, right? That's no different. So the history is no different than hearing a great story from someone tells you a story, and then you go and check it, and you can't back it up. I remember someone told me that Tatenda Taibu cut the top of his bat handle off so he could face Rashid Khan better. I was like, oh my God, what a great story. And I got hold of Tatenda Taibu, and he's like, I don't think I've ever faced Rashid Khan. All right, that story may not be accurate. He did cut the top of his bat handle. In fact, I do need to talk to him about that. Rude just said, John Verity and Mickey Arthur were heavily criticised for the rotation policy of fast bowlers when they're part of the Australian team management, but weren't they basically right? Yes. And couldn't it be argued that the lack of rotation under Lehman meant that they couldn't extend Ryan Harris's career, and Siddle wasn't used as well when he could have been? Yes, I suppose you could make those arguments as well. I think we have now understood a lot. The way that baseball uses their pitches is probably much better than we've used them in cricket. We also understand why we don't do it. And so I do think there is an issue there. But yeah, I think I've talked about that before. I do think a lot of it was, and it wasn't just John Verity and Mickey Arthur, because John Buchanan was involved with it as well, wasn't he? A lot of it was A, being the first ones to say it, and B, I know of an IPL side who, before one season, said no one is guaranteed 14 games. I don't know how many games it was that year. And the players are like, what? And they're like, what we want to do is we want to pick players for specific matchups, for specific pitches, for conditions, blah, blah, blah. We want a long batting lineup in this game and a long bowling lineup against this team, and all this sort of stuff. And they thought they had communicated it really, really well. And the first game, a player who thought he should be in the side wasn't in the side, and it basically broke down from there. So a lot of it is just communication, right? And also, you are trying to train players in a new system. New bowlers coming through now are used to being rested and rotated from a younger age, whereas the bowlers that originally complained about that sort of stuff weren't. So things just move on naturally, I think. Roger says, in the 2007 T20 World Cup, Shoaib Malik scored 8 from 17 balls in the chase. Oh my God. Yuvraj scored 11 from 21 with India batting first, which was the more match-losing innings. I would have to go back and have a look at it. It's a fascinating question, actually. So I don't remember either of those. And yet I have so many memories from the 2007 World Cup, but they're not things like that. We just did a crick picks, and it kept coming up in our crick picks, that particular World Cup. But I don't remember that at all. 8 from 17 or 21 from 11 from 21. I would have to go back and watch that game live, only because was the guy at the other end from one of them smashing it everywhere? Was it a bad matchup? Were they trying to hit the ball hard and kept hitting it to the fielder? There was that Lendl Simmons innings where he just got stuck, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get himself out. He couldn't hit the ball. He couldn't do anything. And I've seen other players who are consciously making these sorts of innings and going, oh, I'll make it up at the end. So there's a very big difference between not being able to hit the ball and just not hitting the ball, if that makes sense. Cam says, as a subjective view, it feels like cricket administration is in the media a lot more than other professional sports. A testament to how shit administration cricket is as a sport, or a statement on the interests of cricket fans. I don't know. Cricket business doesn't get in the media much, does it? If you're a league, if you're the NBA or Premier League, you have the teams, and then you have the league. People aren't probably as interested in the league. When you have cricket teams, international cricket teams, you have the team and the board all in one. And I wonder if that is the difference. I'm not saying cricket administration isn't worse than other sports. I mean, I'm not an expert in other sports' administration. I know a few sports, but and there's certainly some that are poorly run. I know that I've been working with someone recently on a cricket startup, and every time I tell him something about cricket administration, his jaw does, drop off. But I wonder if he might not feel the same with other sports as well. I don't know. But yeah, I think it's more to do with the bond between the national team and the boards, which is very, very different than you get in most sports. Vikas, the bowlers who don't have the power to hit sixes, would they be better if they learned to scoop, shot, or try and get boundaries behind the stumps? Or is it very, very hard to get good at that? It's very hard to get good at that if you're not a good player. I played like 2 scoop shots in my life, and I'm not an expert in that shot, so I can't help you 100% as a player. But as a bad batter, I didn't find it completely natural. Whereas there are some things that do come natural to me. What I would say is, you don't actually have to hit sixes to be handy. I think that Rashid Khan, Shardul Thakur, I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. Pat Cummins, Mitchell Stark would be really, really handy to bat in the power play, and just literally swing out. Because, Shardul's a perfect example of it, and Rashid probably as well. How do you set fields to them when you can only put 2 fielders out? They don't know where they're hitting the ball, let alone where they're hitting the ball, right? And so I think if you can't hit sixes, being able to play in the power play. I always thought Adil Rashid was a perfect player for this. Adil Rashid squirts the ball in every different direction off the bat, and he does have some genuine batting talent, obviously, as well. And just tell him, look, try and get us 20 off 8 and do some confusion and soften the ball up a little bit. So Adil Rashid couldn't hit sixes, and he was someone I thought should play in the power play. So I do think there's another role. Also, you might have someone. This isn't a great example, but my memory is that John Hastings was really good at hitting off spin, and so he could hit sixes against other players, but he wasn't against other bowling types. So I don't think he was as good. But I think Melbourne Stars used to use him specifically as a matchup. If a wicket went early in an over against off spin, they would send him out just to do that. There are lots of tail-enders who probably have a specific skill that is really handy. This is not a good example, but let's say Jimmy Anderson was in your side, and he's number 11, and he's never going to be used, and you've got 2 spinners bowling, and you just go to Jimmy Anderson, go out there and play reverse sweeps. Does that work? I don't know. But those sorts of things, I think, could be fun to try. I think we're way away from that at the moment. And remember that the reason that these things don't happen is always the same, which is that these guys aren't very good at batting to begin with. And when you use pinch hitters, Everyone always thinks about the upside of pinch hitters, but the downside of pinch hitters is not a golden duck. It's 3 off 8. This is brought to you by Cricket 8. They are a new player in the game trying to educate fans on what is really happening in cricket. We have a partnership with them where we host live watch-alongs, do podcasts, and write articles. If you want to know what is really happening with our game, visit cricket8.com. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now. Welcome back to the Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. Ben says, if Anderson had played fewer tests and taken fewer wickets, this seems counterintuitive, but would he be higher rated than he is currently? If he simply didn't play those first however many matches where his figures weren't as good, yeah, no, definitely. But he wouldn't have been the bowler he was. So he can't become that bowler without playing. So you compare him to Cummins. Cummins was already an elite bowler when we saw him at 19, right? Anderson had some great tools, but he wasn't like Cummins, right? And so Anderson becomes good by bowling in the middle in test matches and everything else. And remember, the ball that changes Anderson's career, he sees Stuart Clark and Muhammad Asif use in international matches that he was at. So we know for a fact that he needed that. But there's no doubt, it's something that we're looking at in my book, Ben, it's the Mike Hussey effect, right? Mike Hussey was dropped in his 20s by Western Australia, right? Like in his mid-20s. When players are supposed to be coming into their peak. If he'd played for Australia from the age of 23 or 24, he would have a way lower average. And we would think about him as a good, handy player. But he was picked absolutely at his peak. And even though he tailed off a little bit at the end, he was still well good enough to get some big series to keep his average up really, really high. And so he goes. Matthew Hayden, another perfect example of this. Jonathan Trott, another really good example of this. So there are players who play that 6 or 7 year period in their peak. Michael Vaughan, I would say, is another one, right? They happen to just play in their peak years, and so their record looks incredible overall. Jimmy Anderson didn't have that ability, but he also wouldn't have been the bowler he would have been without that, right? He needed to actually groove himself at test level, specifically on non-helpful pitches, I think, is probably a really important thing for him. James says, last week in response to my Lance Morris question, you said that it's rare for express bowlers to succeed in test level by sheer pace. By popular reputation, Tomo would have to be the epitome of such a rare bowler. So let's just have a look at Jeff Thompson. Where is he? Jeff Thompson's bowling average was 28, right? So you can say that there have been faster bowlers since Jeff Thompson. That's fine. But I don't think there's anyone ever been faster than the other bowlers in his era than Jeff Thompson was. And even then, he had an average of 28. Now, I think if you do a deeper dive of this and you say when he was young and really, really quick, let's have a look at the first few years, see if I'm right here. So in 1975, he played 9 test matches and averaged 30. Either side of that, he was pretty good. 1977, he averaged 25. So he doesn't have any years as a test bowler, as the fastest bowler that we had ever seen by a huge amount, where he averages 20, 21, 22, or even lower than that. So do you understand that even within that, it's very rare? There just aren't test bowlers who are fast only and are successful. So Mark Wood is probably up there. Shoaib Akhtar certainly would be one. I think Shoaib Akhtar would be probably the closest, I would have thought. Because Brett Lee had an outswinger, didn't he? I know Shoaib Akhtar could reverse it. Shoaib Akhtar, again, averages 25.5. And I think top order players handle them. I don't know what Tomo's record was against 8, 9, 10, and 11, but I know Shoaib Akhtar had a phenomenal record against the tail. They could not play him at all. So I do think that you have to add other parts of the game. And as you've said with Tomo, as he got older, he couldn't bowl at the same pace. And I actually think he does become a smarter player. And also, he's got a weird action, so I think it kept him in the game. But I don't think he was ever a high skill level bowler, but he also was never a no skill level bowler. So you have to be fast plus, right? And so it might be it might be something else. It might be reverse swing. It might be the sort of the bounce that someone like Mark Wood seems to get. That sort of interesting, the way he sort of, the ball comes off the pitch a little bit differently for him. It might be the outswinger like Brett Lee. I think you need fast plus something else. And then you're talking about Truman and Larwood and Linwell and, you know, all those sorts of guys, all the way through to Wes Hall and Curtly Ambrose and, you know, Wazim Akram. Very few of them are just fast, right? And the great bowlers are usually fast plus tall in Joel Garner's case, you know, fast plus seam and tall, you know, for some of the others or whatever that may be. Satchmo says, is George Headley in your top 10 batters of all time? No. Where we put Trumper, Clemhill, W.G. Grace, Headley, Pollock, Richards is really fascinating. In some cases, you could even argue that some of those players should not be on the list at all. And in other cases, you talk to contemporaries or you look up the records and everything, and it's like, how is this guy not in the top 50 test batters of all time? So Headley's not in our top 10. I can't remember where he is. It's actually a really good question. I should know that off the top of my head, but I can't remember. But he was obviously absolutely fantastic, but so was Graham Pollock, and, you know, and how you end up ranking those players who didn't play as many test matches. How many did George Headley play? I should know that off the top of my head. Also, George Headley, by coming back after the war and playing a couple of matches, completely nosedived his average. Yeah, it was 22. I think before the war, he was averaging way even higher still. I think he was a fantastic player. And he would certainly be on our list, but I don't know how high he is. It's a good question, Satchmo, but I haven't been thinking about him recently. And it's possible that we don't have him on our list at the moment because those other guys we're going to have to make very subjective calls on. Barry Richards and W.G. Grace and Trumper and these sorts of guys. It's going to be a lot more subjective, although we do have some records with some of them. You know, there are some extra stuff that we can look at. I think with Headley, yeah, so Headley played another 80 first-class games and averaged over 70 in the rest of his first-class games. Like, there aren't too many people who've ever done that, right? So we have, that's the backup for Headley that we'll use, and that's the stuff that we are using for some of these players. Bloody says, when was the last time England had dominated at home, like how Australia and India do now? Do Australia, like how Australia used to do, I assume you mean? I lost to West Indies recently. Was the last time England dominated at home? It's a really good question. I'm trying to think of how many. So, did they have a period? So they lost to South Africa in 10-11, didn't they? And then they would have also had a period where, actually, if I do it by match results, that might work best. Yeah, this might work best. I'm just trying to bring up a list. So if we go to, so 10-11, they lost. 2013-14. Okay, so they lost to Sri Lanka in 2014, didn't they? And then you've got, it's patchy. So there's certainly nothing in the last. They probably maybe won a lot of series, but they always lose test matches and quite often important ones, right? So 2019, they lost, they drew the India series. Can I do it by series? Actually, maybe that's a better way of doing it. Sorry, I think that's a really, really fascinating question, and I'm trying to think if there's a better answer that I can give. But let me just look at. Okay, so start date last. So, okay, so they won 3 series in a row against England, South Africa, and that was a single test match, so that one doesn't count. 2 series. They won from 2014 until 2019. They won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 test series and drew 3. So they drew against New Zealand, they drew against Pakistan, and they drew against Pakistan again. Is that right? 2016. Where's the Sri Lanka one? Is that even before then? Oh no, 2014 Sri Lanka beat them. So that's a pretty good run. They won from 2009. They beat West Indies, Australia, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Oh, sorry, Siri. Sri Lanka, India, and then they lost to Sri Lanka, and then they lost to South Africa. So there's no massive periods. So you would have to go back a long time, I would have thought, to find anything consistent, bloody. William says, I've heard you say something along the lines of sports analytics grew in T20 cricket instead of Test cricket because it's a game of efficiencies. Why did it not take off for 50 over Test cricket too? There's no onus. It was the free market that really changed things as much as anything, William. The owners and the business, county cricket had a little bit of it. And there was obviously, people working with the Australian team at times and, other people involved. But when the IPL came in, especially when Rajasthan was successful, there was certainly a big change right then. And it has bled into 50 over cricket, but most analytics now is still done for T20 games. I can only think of one person off the top of my head who's like a specialist 50 over person as a high-end amateur, if you know what I mean. I'm sure there might be some international actual analysts who are specialists in the 50 over game. Ben said, had cricket been run properly early on and let any country with 11 people wanting to play join in instead of by red trouser wearing men, what countries would have been in cricket that we missed out on? Well, obviously Argentina, USA, Ireland are the three obvious ones. I don't know where Fiji would have gone. There's some interesting cricket from Brazil. Kenya would obviously be in a lot better position. And would we just have had other countries come naturally? Canada would probably be another one. So there's about 7 off the top of my head. Denmark's a really, really interesting one, actually. We've obviously done a double century podcast on that. It's fascinating as well. They're all the ones I can think of off the top of my head. They're all the ones I can think of from there. But, if you talk to Abhishek Mukherjee, because there's more, Andrew Nixon, those sorts of guys, I think they'll have an even longer ledge. Oh, I mean, the Netherlands is another one, isn't it? So Denmark, the Netherlands. And is there another? No, I don't think there was. Yes, so I think those are the major ones that certainly were hard done by. I've also got a feeling that Malaysia, in the back of my head, I know there's an old cricket book I was reading, and it was talking about Malaysian cricketers in it. At the same time, and they were comparing them to like Sri Lankan and Hong Kong cricketers. Well, Hong Kong's probably another one too. John says, not sure if this is a silly question, but is potential pace wasted by pace bowlers putting revolutions on the ball, where that energy spent on those revolutions could be put into generating more pace, essentially a knuckleball, but at full pace or faster? Or is it not physically possible? Yeah, it's not physically possible. You have to put, when the ball comes out of your fingers, it just naturally slides out of your fingers, John. So have a look at a tennis ball, a golf ball, a cricket ball, a baseball, any of those, they're all revolving. And so, weirdly enough, the way to do the knuckleball does have no revolutions on it, but actually slows it down. So I don't think there is a way as we currently understand it. Now, is there a way that we haven't thought about, John? I mean, if you can come up with that, let's take it to some IPL teams and make some money, my friend. Josh says, wicketkeepers part 1.2. What if AB de Villiers or Sangakkara had been in Gilchrist's shoes, keeping and batting throughout their career, but batting behind a legendary batting lineup, facing tired bowlers, and also having time to rest their backs? Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. It's also possible that they didn't get as hurt. So I talked to Kumar about this. It's on the podcast. And I can't remember exactly what he said about this. But yeah, I mean, it does go another way. I think there is an argument to be made that VVS Laxman, if he was needed to bat at number 4 consistently and know there were no other batters around, probably gets more out of his average because he puts a higher price on his wicket and everything else. Like, we know talent alone, and I'm talking about temperament, patience, technique, all the different talent, he should have averaged over 50 in Test cricket, and he doesn't. Knowing that you're batting at first drop and that you have to make the bulk of the runs means that you focus in that way and play that way. So everyone has a different psyche when it comes to that, and what is going to get the best out of them. So I've just interviewed Royal Drummond for my book, and we talked a lot about him liking to bat at the top because it allowed him to put his mark on the game, and that's what got him to make the most runs, right? And I talked to Mark Waugh, and Mark Waugh wanted to win the game and put his team in a winning position, but wasn't as worried about the overall. Once he put his team in what he thought was a good position, so once he made his 100, he would quite often go out, right? Mark Waugh, did he score one score over 150? It was 145 his top score? I can't remember now. But he didn't score many scores over 150. Because once he put his team in a position to win, he was done. Barry Richards told me his one big score was 350. And it was out of a total of like 500 and something. 500, no, not many, which is ridiculous. And he said that was the day he knew he had to bat on because he knew they needed a big total in that game. So Gilchrist has had a mental impact of, I get a free hit here and I can come in and do this and maximize myself. Would AB de Villiers at number 7 behind a great batting lineup just be like, I'll play good innings every now and again, but I don't really need to be a major part of this? Because we know early in his career, he was a little bit like that. Sangakkara wanted to be in the action. And I think even if he would have stayed wicketkeeper, would have asked to go further up the order. So it's and this is a big part of what I'm writing in the book right at the moment. I'm just in the middle of this chapter, Josh, who got me unloaded. But what exactly are these teams trying? And what is it about the match situation or the game itself that dictates how these players are going to play? The second part of this, how much benefit would a team actually get from having an elite clubman like Prasanna Jayawardene versus a great keeper? This is the thing we don't know at the moment. I think a great wicketkeeper probably, if you did advanced analytics, would actually help more than the extra 15 or 20 runs that some of the great wicketkeeper batters can give you. Let's say you create, I'd have to look at the numbers, but 7 chances to wicketkeepers per test. And you have a wicketkeeper who can take 6 of those compared to a wicketkeeper who can take 5. I think that's a massive difference, man. I really do. And the average runs per wicket is 32. Is that the right way of looking at it? I don't even know. But you're starting to get my ideas on this. Then you get to wicketkeepers like Prasanna Jayawardene and Bob Taylor and Darren Berry and Jack Russell, who create, and Alan Knott, who create wickets when other wicketkeepers, who create chances when other wicketkeepers cannot even create that chance. Does that mean every second game they create the next one? So there's now 7.5 chances, of which they're taking 6.5, right? And I'm just making these numbers up because I haven't gone through all the numbers of different wicketkeepers and everything else. But you're starting to see now that a wicketkeeper can make a massive difference. But we aren't marking any of that down, so we don't know. Ali says, do you see regulations coming down on gambling ads like cigarettes, alcohol, and other vices? Yeah, I'm a bit surprised there are in the UK, there are certainly regulations. I know Australia seems to have a lot of gambling ads when I'm over there. And am I not mistaken that Bangladesh is another country that seems to have a lot of gambling ads? I know that England is a lot harder to advertise with gambling and the way that you do it and everything, only because on TalkSport, the way that, and I don't have to do it very much, but you have to signpost the ad separate to everything else compared to other ads where you can just be like, and Johnson's jeans, you can buy Johnson's jeans, whereas there has to be a sting before it with the gambling sections and everything. So I'm not an expert on any of this. So there are already things in place, but yes, I agree. I think that will happen in the future. I think that's probably why you're seeing DraftKings Network buy up podcasts, right? And that's why, we're already seeing people get around to like DAFA News instead of DAFA Bets or whatever it is, and other companies are doing similar things. I think that's why we will see continued sorts of things along that. Being involved with Cricket 8, we don't have any gambling sponsors, but talk about gambling. And it's really interesting we don't want gambling sponsors on Cricket 8 specifically, probably at the moment, right? What the system, how it moves forward and everything else will be really, really interesting. And it's the same with all cricket and all sport, really. Let me just, of course, I've pressed the wrong button here. I will have to go watch this game, although I won't be able to see any anyway because my son's playing cricket today. But I don't think there's any super chats. But there are some super chats. I'll get to them as well. But I just saw Oren here. who said, read your books on the 2009, 2010, 11 Ashes. They were excellent. Thank you very much. I don't know if they're in print anymore. My question is, do you think Dudley North is the least heralded great batter? Do you know what? Dudley North and Bruce Mitchell are really high in our numbers. Would you put Andy Flower in there as well? So there's a couple of weird South African players, or Southern African players, I suppose, in Andy Flower's case, that are not as heralded as they should be because of the time that they played with their teams. If North and Mitchell had the numbers they had now, well, they'd be the two best batters in the side. And everyone will be talking them up. I think both of them were absolutely fantastic. I don't know if they're the least heralded great batter. Barrington's a really interesting one, right? Barrington, I can't even get former players that played with Barrington to tell me he was great sometimes. And you look at his numbers and you're like, am I missing something here? Arco says, what level do you think Ryan Tenduscarter could reach in a proper test playing side? Feels like he could have been at Shane Watson level. Tendo. I want to get him on the podcast, actually, and talk about his career one day. Because I've done some commentary with him. Let me just have a look at his first class record. He averaged 45. Okay, that's higher than I would have thought. I don't think he was Shane Watson's level. But I'm not sure that he couldn't have done a Shane Watson level job. So I think Shane Watson should have always had a high... I mean, he was just 5 times quicker than Tendo. And Tendo probably took a lot of extra wickets on very, very friendly surfaces, which Watto probably didn't have much access to. So I think those things have to be factored in. But I think Ryan Tenduscarter could have been a test player. Yes. I've talked to him about his career in commentary before. He's very humble when he talks about it. But I do think he was that level. Right? What, Grant Elliott maybe is a better comp? I don't know if Grant Elliott even bowled much. But I would have thought Grant Elliott would have been a really good player. Let's have a look at Grant Elliott. He only played 5 tests. Well, that's not handy, Grant, for this conversation. Although Grant Elliott didn't make many first-class runs. So, yeah, maybe he is somewhere between Grant Elliott and Shane Watson then. Tom says, is it possible to create a meaningful innings impact formula for club batters? 20 and 40 over matches using basic scoring data. You need ball-by-ball data. And not all scorebooks have that, but on the advanced apps, I think you can do it. But you would have to probably make it yourself. I don't know. Unless, could you partner with NV Play or one of those kinds of companies and then do it with them? Because I think NV Play is doing it. I don't know what country you're in. I know NV Play's in England and New Zealand. I don't know if they're everywhere in the cricket world. But I think that's the sort of stuff that NV Play could help you with, but also, obviously, video as well. But I could be wrong. Eric Guy says, where would Rabada's career have been if he was in the big 3? In form, I think he's better than Cummins and just behind Bumrah. I don't think he's quite at Cummins' level, but there's a cigarette paper between them. And he's better at some things than Cummins. Just behind Bumrah, yeah, I think that's also fair. But he hasn't been able to improve in subcontinental conditions. I think that's where, with Cummins, I just don't think there's a place you can't bowl him. Look, he'd be... I don't know about his career, honestly, but he'd be a hell of a lot more famous and a hell of a lot more respected if he was in one of the big 3 nations. We just talked about Dudley North. Rabada is not the Dudley North of cricket, but there is a ceiling on your level unless you then go on to be an IPL star, right? If you go on to be an IPL star, things are very, very different. And he's become a very good IPL player, but I don't think he's like, AB de Villiers or Chris Gale, right? And so I do think it affects his reputation and everything a little bit. His actual cricket, I don't know. I think that's a really good question, Iragai, but I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. Gaurav with the super chat, thank you very much. If you could have been a contemporary commentator in any cricket era, which period would that be? It's probably 85 to 95. Because I think that's probably when we first have our first load of international teams that are all strong. And if you go to any other era, you don't have that many good teams. So it's probably that era. Pretty happy with the era I have been a commentator for as well. And the other one I'd be really interested in is probably 1895 to 1910. I think a lot of cricket really changed in that era as well. So I think those would probably be the two that just instantly pop to my mind. I think those are the two. ABCD says, which period had the most world-class S-tier players, and how did 4 world-class bowling all-rounders pop up together in the 80s? I don't know if I'd ever be able to answer the second part of that question. World-class S-tier players. I mean, it's probably now. It's probably not the answer you want. Early 2000s, 90s, 80s. But you're talking about S-tier. There's a lot of it. I mean, there's a few S-tier players at the moment, isn't there? It depends on where you cut off the S-tier. Like, we just had an era that overlapped between Kumar Sangakkara, Steve Smith, Virat Kohli, AB de Villiers, Joe Root. Maybe Williamson is just out of that S-tier. That, you know, and we have Bumrah, Rabada, Anderson, Ashwin, Jadeja. We had, so are they all S tier? I think a lot of them are. It feels like a lot of S tier players to me. I find it hard to believe. And I probably missed some there. Like, I don't, oh, you didn't say, I can't remember everyone, but it would feel to me like, yeah, we had a lot of S tier players in that period. I don't think there's a period before 1980 when we had anywhere near as many. There's just more cricketers, more nations who are better at cricket. You know, up until 1979, New Zealand had won 1 series in their life, right? Up until 1983, you know, India was a good side, but, you know, a fringe nation, really. Certainly not a major nation. Pakistan, up until the 80s. So there's 3 teams. West Indies, good team at times in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Don't really have a great team until that late 70s period themselves, right? South Africa wasn't even in the game. So you can't have that many S-tier level players if the whole world isn't playing. It's a bit like the NBA. I think you make a claim now, there are more great players playing in the NBA now than there ever has been because the NBA has been opened up to the world, right? That doesn't mean that you don't prefer another era, but there are more S-tier level players now. You know, it's why the MVP debates of recent times have been like, oh, who do we pick between Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who's averaging 1 million points and playing incredible defense, or Joker, who's basically getting a triple-double, or Luka, who's scoring 83 points per game. You know, it's just gone to a ridiculous level, and I think most sports have. The more you open up the sport, the more people that are available to be great. So before 1985, you couldn't have a great Sri Lankan player, even if you had a great Sri Lankan player, right? Before 1960, it was kind of hard to be a great New Zealand player, right? We didn't have any great Zimbabwean players. So all of these things have changed quite dramatically over the last little while. Anyway, that's me done for the Wagon Wheel. Thank you again. Remember, you can check out everything we do at goodareas.co. You can find all of our different social media if you're that kind of person as well. Shout out to everyone who was on the YouTube today and also everyone who supports us on Patreon, patreon.com/Jarrod Kimber. And we will see you again very soon for more of this kind of thing here at the Wagon Wheel and I suppose beyond. Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber.